there are familiar faces popping in as well. Um,
Hi, hi,
so
Jay.
Jay, I wrote this backstory. I will do a little introduction for everyone who just joined in. Today we have Jay Averitt with us, and he's a veteran privacy engineer, and he is currently on privacy in Microsoft. So with the open AI and like the AI becoming mainstream, I think he has a lot to share with us, and both factions within the Battle for AI team could learn from this master. And Jay, thank you for being here. As per questions, you just please do what you just were doing. It was amazing already. I will just pop in and out to
Okay.
put these questions there. So stage is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. It's I mentioned earlier, for those that weren't here, really, I think what Mercan's doing is really special in terms of kind of gamifying the privacy experience, and I think that there's not much out there, and I think there is a lot in the security standpoint. So I think it's great that we can do that. And it would be interesting if we could. There's some things I've seen where people have tried to do that with AI governance, and I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out in the future. Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, the thing about AI governance is it's got the privacy fundamentals at its core, and those are really what I focus in on, like the data minimization piece of privacy is something that is really important to me when I'm doing a review from an AI governance standpoint. If somebody's entering something into a prompt, do we need to store that prompt? Hopefully not, because that's we aren't storing people's search queries. We aren't focusing on that, and so those are things that and what else, like in terms of data minimization, what does our model consist of, and are we taking appropriate steps to make sure that our model is only collecting what is necessary, and we're not taking in additional information not needed for the model, things like that. And then, but it's funny how things are evolving. Like, I was taking the stance that no prompt should be collected under any circumstance, but you also want to make sure that you're capturing appropriate feedback. And one of the things that, from a responsible AI standpoint, is you want to make sure that your models are do not have bias in them, or you're not treating anybody unfairly, or your models aren't doing something that would affect society at large negatively. And in order to do that, you kind of need to, as a check and balance on that, you kind of need to get feedback around what you're doing from an AI standpoint. So if somebody enters a prompt and they get something that they deem biased, or deem is completely inaccurate, or somehow feel like the result was really negative, you want to be able to have a feedback mechanism in place, where that individual can click on, hey, I found this offensive, and if you're doing that, then what are you doing with that prompt? Because obviously, if you're collecting this feedback, you kind of need the prompt to be able to actually do some action on the model to resolve whatever bias was impacted, or or whatever detrimental thing that actually appeared when that person entered in the prompt. So I think data minimization comes into play there too, because okay, now we actually have to capture the prompt, but we want to probably make sure that we're not tying that to a specific user, or and then you also want to take privacy principles in place, like, did we get adequate consent from the user to capture this the prompt? So I mean, a lot of it really boils down to focusing in on from a privacy standpoint of exact fundamentals that we look at, like making sure that that data is minimized, that we're collecting, that we're recognizing people's consent when we need to get consent, and those kind of things. So while we're kind of breaking new ground with AI governance, a lot of it really is the same. So I mean, I'm seeing a lot of that in my current role, just because uh, it's being injected into almost every product that is being offered. And those are the kind of things that I'm looking at in a review. Is I'm primarily looking at it from a privacy standpoint, but I'm always like looking at it and at the AI elements and making sure that they are making sense from a privacy standpoint.
Jay,
But
may I
yeah,
interrupt?
sure.
Sorry to interrupt it. But
Yeah,
like, I just want to like also make it a little interactive if it's okay for
sure.
you.
Yeah, I
So
appreciate that.
we have
Actually,
we have
yeah,
we have Swati here with us. Swati,
yes,
are you here right now? Steve
Yes,
also
I'm here.
mentioned.
hey,
Hello, Swati. So
Hey.
still, I will get back to your question in a second. Thanks for asking. So Jay, actually, like the current privacy quest and all the games we previously did was around privacy engineering, right? But
yeah,
for the last couple of months, I also included like privacy engineers who know AI governance as well. Just like you,
yeah,
Swati is one of those who's like we're currently doing the first AI governance after the synthetic data quest. So we were also like talking about these during that brainstorm sessions.
yep,
So here you mentioned like about the fairness of the data and the data minimization,
right.
but like what Swati taught me was really to take this like bias in the model and the bias in the data part. Swati, this is the place that I want to give the stage to you. Um, Based on that, like we talked about tools like Lime and those reporting tools. You remember? So like,
Yes,
how are
the
they?
lime and the
Mhm.
Shapley. Yes, yes, yes. So the lime and the Shapley, they are more about to explain the in
Interpretate.
explainability and interpretability of the model on how the model is supposed to behave, and it is to help us as a user understand about more about the model. But then when it comes to the bias, did you say you had a tool that will help with?
We don't have. I mean, we may have a tool to do that. It would be more, if I'm looking at it, as more. I would be analyzing, to check the bias itself. But we may have other parts of Microsoft may have automated tools using to assess them. I'm fairly certain they do, but I haven't seen those firsthand.
And my question was actually for both of you, like, did you have these tools in practice and like what was your experience around it? But yeah, like they're more on the accountability and transparency explainability side, like what mentioned. But I just wondered because you were mentioning those challenges, Jay, if
Yeah,
you
I
have
mean,
a
I mean, Swati, so do you, I mean, that would be curious for me to know. I mean, do you have a tool that y'all use to analyze bias? And how, I guess that would be a question for me, is like, how effective have you um, seen that tool at determining bias?
That's a really good question, Jay. So the closest that I could come to when it comes to determining if there is bias in the model or in the data is so we have an independent third party auditor do this auditing for our models, and uh, I don't know if I can take the name of the vendor because this will be published on YouTube, but I can ping you offline the name of the vendor that is doing the bias audit for us. But now the marketplace is like full of these vendors who will want to, or who are offering the service as wanting to do a bias audit. And in order for them to do the audit, I exactly don't know how they do the audit, but we give them certain like sample data sets that are used for training the model, and then how the output comes out of the model. But beyond that point, I really don't know what is the process that they use to determine if there is bias in the model or not.
So, I mean, not to interview you, but the third party is doing an analysis of using this tool to determine if there's bias or not, and then based on that, you take action on the model if bias is found.
Yes. So based on the whatever we receive from the auditor, we are going to either course correct the findings, or if everything is like there are no red flags and everything is green, then we will be publishing those results from the bias audit on our like put a link to that in our privacy policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And I think that's probably industry standard there, where that third parties are auditing LLMs in general, and looking for those things. If you're being responsible, you would want that kind of. So I think that's probably, I would say, not that I know what everybody does, but that aligns with what I would expect.
Thank you so much for both of you, and Swati joining in for the conversation. Steve, you have a question? You can just, go ahead if you like, or I can read it for yourself as well.
Well, I've actually posted two. Since we're talking about bias, let me ask the second question first, and that is, privacy opt-outs basically mean that people self-select in terms of data that they make available for anything, which includes for AI. Therefore, your data set will inherently be biased towards the people who decide they want to participate. How do you deal with that? How do you account for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. You know, I think from an engineering perspective, I mean, I think you have to equate, okay, and understand that that's happening, and then understand, okay, maybe the people that are opting into this model, or opting into having their prompts collected, maybe are less privacy concerning than those that opted out, and maybe there is some inherent bias in that, and make corrections to that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's one of these things that you have to figure out as you're doing it, and it's not something that I think anyone's got a great answer to. I mean, I'll throw it over to Swati, see if she's got a better view.
I do have something that I want to add here. So, Scott, I'm sorry, Steve. What I think the closest thing is for the privacy opt-outs for those records, to have us model the synthetic data as closely possible, because when there are multiple ways when the data subject opts out, we could anonymize those records. And then before we are anonymizing, there could be a soft delete or something in our transactional database. So we could closely mirror those opt-out records and then generate synthetic data that looks like them, and then have that data set be pumped into the model. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, as long as you're following the anonymization techniques and synthetic data that you're following, are good from a regulatory standpoint. I mean, I think that's a good approach, if you can do that.
I have a follow-up question on this amazing question, Steve, if I may. Swati, this one's for you actually. And what is the utility metrics and the things that just Jay mentioned, like if you're following the legal requirements with the synthetic data generation, etc. Is there any models that you use for that utility metrics in the synthetic data sense?
I actually did not understand what the utility matrix is.
So like last week Aldo was here, and me and him did this synthetic data quest, and there we mentioned about what are the metrics that define the value of the synthetic data, like with regard to privacy, fidelity, etc. Yeah.
I understand. I'm so sorry. When you said utility metric, it was METRIC, right? I understood as MATRIX, like a matrix. And I was thinking, there's a utility matrix. I have never known about this concept. Yes, the utility metric when it comes to the utility of the synthetic data. Like if you are using the synthetic data and then training your model, how much is that even? How accurate is the prediction of now this retrained model on the synthetic data? I honestly do not know the answer. This is something very experimental, and it also depends on the other parameters in the model. So this will have to be examined on a case by case situation.
Thank you so much. Jay, please continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I have to keep throwing questions over to you, Spotty, but it's just great to have someone else to chat with about this stuff, since it's, it is so novel and everyone's doing things differently. But, what kind of, you mentioned that you guys are looking at things from a bias perspective using tooling, but what other tooling are you using in your AI governance? So like most of the stuff done is like everything at Microsoft is all done with homegrown tools basically, but I know there are other tools out there, and you probably don't want to use the name of them, and you don't have to, but I more just want to know generically what kind of tools you're using, and what to be able to make these analyses, and what tools from the AI governance standpoint are being used.
Yes, so we are still starting off this journey, and there are, I think what we are exploring is an extension to the privacy impact assessments. Like a lot of vendors are offering like AI assessments as an extension, either as an extension module or it's in the beta and you can try it out. But none of these seem to be very in the sense, they all seem to be very labor intensive and manual about having conditional logic in the questions. If this is, say, if you said, yes, I have data about protected attributes like disability status and ethnicity that is going into the model, then you go answer this other question about how was this data, like was this consented to before this was collected or something of that sort. So and I'm still researching this whole thing myself, but I did see a couple of beta releases on the automation, the AI assessment automation. I think that's what they call it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and just from the privacy automation stuff that's out there, even is, depending on the company and depending on how advanced they are, it can be a very manual process as well. I mean, there are tools that do things like Bravado does code scanning to come up with and look for things you may have missed in your privacy reviews, there's giant vendors out there doing other things, but I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is more aimed at like actual compliance and not automation. It's more like, hey, here's a database for you to type in all your junk, or here's a framework for your privacy review, or here's a system of truth for you to sign off on your stuff. So yeah, I mean, anything that actually automates the process and actually does it well. I think that's something we're struggling with, even on the privacy standpoint. And so yeah, it's cool to hear of anything that's actually effective at doing it from an AI governance standpoint. But I think, you know, it's also new. You know, even in privacy is not that old, really, since people didn't really pay attention to it until GDPR came out in 2017 or 2018. But this stuff is yeah, I think vendors are basically playing catch up, trying to figure out how to create tools in this space that might actually do that. Does anyone else have any questions? I do think it's more fun for this to be an interactive experience than me just rambling for however long this chat is. So happy to answer any questions that folks have.
I have a second question.
Sure.
It's in the chat, but I'll read it here. Is that,
Yeah.
you know, of course, ChatGPT, the other LLMs, the hot thing, everybody's using those to generate all sorts of content about all sorts of things. And that content gets posted on the web. Those tools use as their input stuff they find on the web. So this is becoming a self-feeding site. I'm just wondering, at what point does it just become completely self-feeding? And what happens to the quality of the tools as a result?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of interesting. I mean, because basically you're saying it's sort of a cannibalization of is taking existing content, regurgitating it, reposting it on there. And then also you're, by doing such, you are sort of taking away the original source of that content. So if, you know, Wikipedia was consumed by ChatGPT or whatever LLM, that person takes basically that content from Wikipedia, publishes it under their own name, and then, you know, you have a hard time finding the authority of actual source, not even though Wikipedia itself is 100% authority, but yeah, you have an authority problem. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've got a great answer to that. I mean, I think that's something that is yeah, I mean, as you point out, it's definitely a problem. I mean, Swati, what do you think? How do we solve that problem?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention because I was formulating the next question that I wanted to ask Jay about.
Yeah, okay, well, all right, well, so he basically, and Steve, tell me if I butcher your query, but his query was basically like, somebody enters something into an LLM, they get back a response, which that response was generated from the web, essentially, because most of the models scrape data from the web to create the model itself. So that person gets back a response generated by the LLM. Then they post it on there, and it seems like he's basically saying, like, we're cannibalizing everything by taking something that was on the web, posting it back again on the web, you know, under a different author, assumingly. And, you know, where does it stop, and how do we have a solution to like this endless cycle of regurgitating data that was already on the web? All right, and it's correct, Steve, chime in if I got it wrong.
Well, no, that's essentially correct. There's two issues, and the authoritative one that you mentioned is one, but the other one, if I could use the analogy, it seems like there's genetic drift, an issue that every version, subsequent version, just gets a little bit crappier.
Right.
You know.
You got a great solution to that, Swati? I mean, I don't. I mean, other than that's something that we've got to figure out. And
Yeah, that kind of closely ties into the IP problem of these LLMs that the legal world is battling with. And one thing that kind of looked promising, which most of the well-reputed LLM providers like OpenAI and big organizations like that are working towards watermarking their content uh, based on what was generated from the LLM. So maybe that might be one step closer for us to when the model is getting regurgitated with more and more iterations of these watermark content. Then maybe there is some way for us to know as a consumer that, okay, this is like the 10th iteration of the same question, or this image is like the 10th iteration of somebody else's prompt engineering from prior to what I'm seeing now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is good. I mean, because I think that IP aspect of it is something that is difficult to figure out, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see, where that lands about who actually owns the IP of everything being created under these models. And yeah, I think the watermarking part of it, that's an interesting, it'll be interesting to see how we solve that problem.
Yes. So I have a question for Jay, and I will post the link here. So Jay, when I went to the AI Global Governance Summit in Boston last year, which was conducted by the IAPP, the Frontier Model Forum is something I learned during my time there at the conference. And this was like a collaboration between Google, Microsoft, Anthropic AI, and one more large organization, wherein they were all planning to put together the best practices around the AI and governance and how we should handle these or put some guardrails around these major problems that are concerning. So I was wondering if you have any insight into how things are, because Microsoft is one of the collaborators on the Frontier Model Forum.
Yeah, I don't know specifically what Microsoft's doing with the Frontier Model Forum. I know that, I mean, our responsible AI group is working basically around the clock with providing different guidance around the scenarios. And I think, I mean, that's interesting. I actually wasn't aware of the Frontier Model Forum until you just pointed that out. It'll be interesting to see, how that works, because, all of these LLMs do things a little differently, and Anthropic's guardrails are different than OpenAI's guardrails and how they work. And so I think finding that commonality, or at least some guardrails that we all can agree on, is a good starting point, because I think at the end of the day, we've got to have these models have got to have some universality. We have standard privacy practices that everyone can kind of agree to. Everyone does things a little differently from company to company, but at least the GDPR. I know there is the AI European governance coming down the pike, but at least the GDPR kind of sets the floor of what you should do from a privacy standpoint. And then each company kind of has their own internal controls around that. So I think, if we can get to some kind of commonality of, okay, here's a framework we can all agree to is at least a floor of what you should be doing from an AI governance standpoint, then each company can kind of create their controls around that. And some companies may institute higher controls and better practices, and some may not. But at least you've got that floor, and we're kind of in this scary new world of AI having at least that idea of a fundamental level of protection is a good one. So yeah, I didn't even know about that. So glad you brought that to my attention. Anyone else? Questions?
Steve has a question, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'll keep going until somebody interrupts me.
Sure.
I want to go back earlier. The comment was made. Swati made a comment about synthetic data, and you know, as a way, you know, basically you describe differential privacy. Where you create and I want to make a distinction here because you specifically talked about creating synthetic data that's similar to a real person. And of course, one of the fundamental problems there is you have a privacy budget, because at some point, multiple queries against a model with that in it will eventually reveal who this was referring to. And I'm just wondering that, has any analysis been done about what the privacy budget is actually going to be, depending on the size of the, for example, an LLM, because you have so much other data that can provide correlations to allow you multiple paths to the same person. How do you know when you've consumed that privacy budget? How do you know when to stop? How do you know when to pull that data out and retrain the model without that data? How do you address those kinds of things?
Yeah. I'll take a stab at it and I'll let Swati answer. I mean, differential privacy on itself, like I think, you know, under the GDPR standard, you've got to be extremely certain that you're meeting that bar. And it's a tough one. I mean, and so, I mean, I've looked at stuff and, you know, engineers will come to me all the time and say, I mean, there's no way we can possibly reconstruct this. And, you know, but they're using some kind of technique that I've never heard of before. And so I can't look at it and say, hey, no, that looks good to me. And so, you know, I have to have other people look at it and be like, hey, look, is there any way to reconstruct this? Engineering's telling me not. There's absolutely no way this is reconstructable. And then, you know, finally, I'll either get a yes or no from that. But I mean, but as you say, I mean, that's an expensive proposition because I've spent, you know, time looking at it, trying to make a determination. I've had a bunch of other engineers looking at it, making a determination. And the actual process of creating this technique that is doing that is also, you know, an expensive proposition. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think I think it's something that's probably got to be solved, because I mean, I think there is some value in using a technique, as Swati mentioned, and being able to train the model with this data. But you know, yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, which is been a common thread to every question. But yeah,
there are certain industry standards, right, Steve? Like I think I don't remember the numbers on top of my head, but for differential privacy, there was a number like 1.6, and then for the K anonymity,
right.
for there are epsilon values which have to be between a certain range. So I think that is where when these large organizations, they all collaborate and come up with standards, or even if it is something like a NIST AI framework, so we could receive, so it will be helpful if we could receive some sort of a guidance on what the range should be, because we know there is this privacy budget, and then we are doing this delicate balance between the utility of the data and then protecting the privacy of the customer. So if we can get like concrete guidelines on what the acceptable range should be from one of these like a NIST AI RMA framework, or one of these maybe like from the Frontier Model Forum, where all these organizations are collaborating, that will be helpful for us.
Well, let's assume that there's a number and say it's 10 to the minus 9. You know, the epsilon is 10 to the minus 9. Okay. We'll use as an example an organization not currently represented, Google, in this. You know, there are more Google well, there were, maybe they're not anymore, but there were more Google queries per day than that. So 10 to the minus 9 is 100 million, or is 1 billion. Okay. There are more than a billion queries against the same model. That you have now, epsilon has gone, your epsilon is not good enough. You now have a certainty of having exposed that data. And that's on a daily basis. Okay. So even if you have a number, let's say that the epsilon is well defined. How do you address, because how do you know that there's not some third party, well, NSA maybe, who's out there making all these queries from multiple directions, so that you can't necessarily correlate that all those queries are coming from the same party to accumulate this data and defeat your differential privacy, that they're doing it deliberately? How do you know that? And so how do you protect against that? Or do you even try?
Honestly, like I said, it will have to be, so when they're publishing the range again, it will have to be like based on the size of the model and the complexity of the model. So for example, when the EU AI Act came out, and it was for like the high risk model, the severity being high risk, and the medium risk and the low risk, and they had a different set of guidelines for the high risk model. So similarly, as a counterpart, when it comes to the complexity of the model and the parameters it is taking in, and the data and the volume of data it's being trained on, so we will have to accordingly receive those, some sort of a guidance on what should the ranges be for a certain complexity of the problem model.
I shared a link just now, and it was around like the same idea. European Commission had this like statistics thing, and we gave like a comment as Privacy Innovation Lab, and this was the same thing I mentioned there. So like, again, my humble opinion as an aspired privacy engineer among these veterans is, again, I think it's in lawmaking sense hard to write those concrete numbers in epsilon values, etc., because technology changes, the threats you model change with that technology, and it can become outdated. And I think that's why we're not seeing it anywhere, like having those concrete things. Because on the other hand, then there are claims that they're using differential privacy, but they're using so much high epsilon values that actually it's worth nothing, but it's just marketing limbo to use that we're protecting your data kind of thing. Yeah. Any other questions so far? We're coming to the last 5 minutes, so last chance, those who remain silent for now. But before that, Jay, which faction are you on? Have you picked your faction yet?
I'm not picked. Which one should I be on?
Please be at Apocalypse. We're lonely right now, so.
Okay. All right. I will join that one. But yeah,
right.
no, it's no, I need to get on there and join. But yeah.
So for those who follow the Battle for AI, one of your side quests is actually putting in Privacy Quest what Jay's faction is. So that's a mini game within this Fireside chat. But yeah, stage is yours. There are students from the Privacy Innovation Lab, so you guys should be asking about like privacy engineering, etc. Like if I were you, I wouldn't. Like I would be like Steve. So shoot, guys, it's your last chance. Today we have a shy group, or people are exhausted because I'm doing every night another quest, another event. People are
well, thank goodness. Well, thank goodness Steve and Swati were here because I really did not want to. I was like, how on earth am I going to chat for 45 minutes on AI governance to begin with? Because yeah, it's much more fun to have this as an interactive discussion. And I mean, as you know, as you found out, nobody has all the answers, and I certainly don't. And you know, it's always good to hear differing opinions and get that. So it, you know, is a learning experience for me as well. So I really appreciate being invited here and enjoy meeting all of you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for being here. And I told this yesterday, but again, I see all these faces on one-on-one, but I feel like extra happy when all these faces come together like this at the same session, same call. And yeah, I think like on my part, it was a hell of a learning session for me. So thank you, Swati. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Steve, for the questions. And yeah, and Jay, welcome to the AI Apocalypse faction. I will send you your starters pack after
Okay.
the event.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay
Thank you
then.
so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care and happy Data Privacy Day 2004. And yeah, please stay tuned for more events and gaming nights. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye from Privacy Quest Village.